So, Mamta, welcome to the podcast. I don't know how it's taken us this long to actually connect for an episode because I've been following your work for many years and we have run into one another on LinkedIn, been chatting, but it's great to finally have you. So, I just wanted to welcome you.
Thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be here. I too have been following your work, enjoying your podcast. So it's a real delight to be a part of your podcast today.
Mamta, why don't you start off by telling us a bit about what you do professionally?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I am a psychiatrist in Ottawa, I actually enjoy telling my story to colleagues, partly because one of the lessons is just be open to where you end up, right? So I trained in psychiatry. I did a fellowship in child psychiatry, finished in 1990, and that's what I thought I was going to be doing my whole career, is treating children and their families in psychiatry. And that September of 1990, I had this opportunity, unexpected, by a colleague to present at a medical conference. She was the president of this major medical organization that year, was putting on a big conference in Ottawa, and calls me in a panic on a Friday evening around midnight that her speaker the next morning is sick and has just canceled. And she's like, "Can you fill in?" Right now, remember, this is 1990, so we don't have, PowerPoint or laptops, or, we actually had slides. They were hard slides. You had to put in order for a presentation upside down and backwards so they would show properly, and we'd put them in this round thing called a carousel. Some of your audience might not even know what we're talking about, but yeah. It took a long time to prepare for a presentation. And so all of that to say, when she asked me, I wanted to help her, and I said, I'm happy to do this, but my presentation is ready for a talk on depression. I've just finished teaching the residents. Can I talk about that? And she said, "I don't care what you talk about. I just need a warm body tomorrow morning." And that is actually how thinking I was going to do child psychiatry, take my carousel into a group of hundreds of doctors to talk about depression. I had several of them come up to me after and say, "I really liked your approach to depression. It sounded like you were telling my story. Will you see me as a patient?" And within 3 months, that was my whole practice, just by word of mouth.
Wow, that is incredible. Mamta, there is so much there because some of the advice that we are conventionally given is to say no to things to protect your time. But my view is, especially when you're earlier in life,
Yes.
earlier in your career, you should probably be more open-minded as you were to saying yes to more opportunities because you don't know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. And so I think that that's important for us. I think that, and over the years, I've done my share of helping colleagues learn to set boundaries, which is important for our health. And say no at times. But I think that it's not a blind say no to anything more. I think it is important for us to, continue to allow ourselves to be exposed to things that might be of interest to us that we just didn't know because we had never, seen or experienced that before.
So I want to give the listeners some context here. I think it was in February. I had written this post on LinkedIn because at that time, Mamta, I was struggling a little bit in terms of finding ways to grow at work. I felt like I was growing outside of work, but I asked myself, how could I bring this to my day-to-day work as a radiologist? So one of the things I challenged myself to do was to pick up something new. And I started to cover nuclear medicine at our hospital. I went through some formal training with one of my colleagues, took a course, and this ended up being a great way for me to challenge myself. And I wrote about that. And then you left a comment that really resonated with me. And then once I read your comment, I said, I have to have Mamta on the show because I was really struggling at that time to craft a career that was going to be sustainable and enjoyable for the long term. We all go through these dips from time to time. And so I want to ask you about growing at work. I think this is really, really important for us, but I want to get your take on why we should all strive to do this.
Yeah, I think it's such an important concept. And, in that comment, I do remember it because I think I was quoting a mentor that was really important to me. And I, as a resident, and now we're talking, 30 some years after that, but I still remember him saying to me, you can only do what you're doing well, Mamta, for about seven to 10 years at a time. And then you have to tweak it somehow to continue to do, and to do it and to enjoy it for the next 7 to 10 years. And basically thinking about your career as a series of these kinds of tweaks, maybe 4 or 5 over your career. I thought that was really interesting because nobody had ever talked to me about that before. And one of the things that he also talked about was just recognizing that as physicians, we're learners. We're continuous learners. And the whole idea that at some point we're going to stop and just fold up our brains and put it away actually isn't going to happen. And even at retirement, it's not like we're going to stop learning. It's who we are. And so how do we, instead of think that now that we're finished our residency, we're done, to recognize that we're going to do this in an ongoing way. And the tweaks don't have to be big, right? Sometimes it is really just looking at, this is my area of specialty, but is there another aspect to this field that I can do a little bit more in, which is what you described? Could it be, working in another setting or with another group of people for part of my work? Sometimes that will add something new, a new, area of challenge or stimulation or learning opportunity for us. Sometimes it's not within our area of specialty, but it might be still within medicine. Like, do I want to do more teaching or do more research or do a little bit more volunteer work for my medical organization or something of that sort. And sometimes it is outside of medicine as well. Right. But it's really understanding that, just having that growth mindset that Carol Dweck talks about of I can learn, right? And I want to continue to do this.
Yeah, those are some really helpful strategies that you outlined, Mamta. But I'm wondering if you can maybe add a little bit of color to your own story and talk about maybe specific things that you did to continue growing. You talked about that example in 1990 where you were asked to just cover at a talk and it led to this new avenue for you. But can you talk about a few more specific things that maybe you did to generate these tweaks and make it sustainable for the long term?
Yeah, and as I said earlier, sometimes, there are opportunities that are presented. We don't necessarily look for them, but if when you hear them, there's something about them that excites you, that resonates with you, that aligns with perhaps an area of interest or passion or your values, then I say, try it, go for it. And in my own situation, you're right. So, here I am training in child psychiatry, seeing an opportunity to work more with physician colleagues and thinking, this is really meaningful to me and I do want to do more of this. As I did more of it, one of the things I really started to expand into was the whole concept of advocacy. Like, I realized that this was an area that nobody wanted to think about, nobody wanted to talk about, and then how do I start to have people recognize this as an important issue that is not just for the individual doctor, but, for our patients and ultimately for our profession and the healthcare system. So advocacy, that was a whole new area for me to learn about. I realized maybe, say, the same, about 7 to 10 years into my own career of working with colleagues, that, this is a huge privilege. I'm really learning a lot, but really recognizing I am limited by what I can do, with a colleague one-to-one in my office. I can help them, but then they go back to working in the culture and the healthcare system that really have the drivers for, why they became overwhelmed in the first place. So as I start to think, how can I start to address things at the level of the culture and the healthcare system in which we live? Again, my practice grew. I was already doing a little bit of leadership development, mostly in the area of leadership resilience at that time. But I thought, there's a lot of leadership is about leading people. And as a psychiatrist, this is an area I'm very comfortable with. I started to do more leadership development, becoming qualified, getting trained, getting my own MBA, but ultimately then doing more leadership development for physicians, hoping that as more physicians get into leadership roles in the healthcare system, that we can start to have an impact and create healthier medical workplaces. And then, you may have heard I also am a coach. And again, a very interesting process, because as I started to do more leadership development, I would sometimes have colleagues come, who are perhaps, say, going through a process, in their own leadership journey. If I, say, teach a course on leading change and someone is actually initiating, a new EMR in their hospital and they're the lead, they'll often ask me, Mamta, can you just support me through this? And so, I would have sort of helped colleagues in that regard. I got a phone call probably now almost 20 years ago from a colleague, and he said, Mamta, I'm taking over as chief of staff at such and such a hospital. My predecessor said you were really helpful when he got overwhelmed. He said, do I have to wait to get overwhelmed, or can I come now? And we both chuckled a little bit and said, well, I kind of need a diagnosis to bill OHIP. But I said, look, I'm here as a friend, as a colleague. Please reach out, in any way that I can, if I can help you in any way. And he actually did call me back about a month later, and he said, I'm having dinner with my brother-in-law, who's a CEO, like a corporate CEO here in downtown Toronto, and he has a coach. He said, can't you coach me? And I said, I have no idea what a coach is, but let me find out, right? I think I'm among the first, if not the first physician in Canada to get my coaching certificate at the time available in the U.S. And again, that's how I, expanded my own practice to not just do clinical work and a lot of leadership development and speaking, but also coaching physician leaders.
I think it's really interesting, Mamta, where you have taken this, and you talked about the coaching that you do. My belief is that the way you are able to have impact in that one-on-one setting, at the end of it, there's probably a feedback loop that is generated. You can see right in front of you the amazing work that you've done. And I think sometimes in medicine, with our routine day-to-day work, I can tell you as a radiologist, going through a long list of cases, there is really no feedback loop at the end of that, right? So I find some of these extra things, it really helps me to see the good that I'm doing. And that's one of the reasons that I decided to take the teaching that I love to do on the podcast to work. And I became a teaching director at our hospital, teaching medical students, teaching residents. And when you see the impact that you have, it makes it sustainable. So
absolutely. And I just want to remind us, right, that the more we learn about burnout, the more we see that there's sort of the spectrum where there's, say, burnout at one end where, we're tired and we're cynical, we're not really working at our best. But at the other end, there's engagement, right, where there's a sense of
100%.
excitement and interest and dedication. And I think that that's what, continuing our growth in our career allows us to do, is to have that ongoing interest and then that ongoing engagement that I think does help balance out our ability to, feel burnt out.
So why don't we take this and maybe talk about burnout first? I want to talk about resilience too, but let's segue to burnout. I know my signs for burnout, and my biggest tell for myself personally is that I start to feel like the work that I'm doing doesn't matter as much. And then some cynicism will kind of creep in. So those are kind of my two signs. But Mamta, can you go over some of the key telltale signs of burnout?
Yeah, thank you for that. And the one you described actually is a key one in this, probably at what we would say the second stage. But let's go back. The first stage is what we would call, because there are three stages described. So the first is emotional exhaustion. And this is the stage where colleagues will say to me, I can get through my day. I can get everything done in the workplace. Nobody would have any idea that, I'm struggling in any way, but I get to the end of my day and I'm exhausted. I don't have anything left to give. So this is the point where people will say to me things like, I'll come home and I'll just put like a journal up in front of my face, with my family. So they very clearly know I don't have anything to give them right now. Right? And I just need a few minutes to myself. Colleagues will tell me I'll drive home, I'll park my car in the driveway, I'll turn it off, and I'll just sit in it for a few minutes, right? Just trying to gather a little bit more energy to go into sort of the next stage of my day, right? So that's emotional exhaustion. We can do the things we have to do, but they are really draining us at that point, and we keep pushing through. And then that can move into the second stage, which is depersonalization. And what that term really means is that we start to pull away from people. What we realize is that it's the people in our lives that are the most draining for us, partly because they're probably the ones that we care about the most and we want to give to the most. And so then they become more draining. And in the workplace, we see this where, colleagues will walk down the hall but not make eye contact, because then that might start a conversation where I have to give something more. I will grab a sandwich at my desk instead of eating in a common space because, it's just easier for me and I don't have to do that social part. I'll go to a meeting, I'll go late and I'll leave early so I don't have to do that social chit chat. And then in our personal lives too, right? We start to feel like, where previously we might enjoy seeing friends after work or waiting for the weekend to do, to see family or friends. Now that's just like one more thing I have to do. I'm trying to find a way to get out of it. And I really start to pull away from people. And we see this in what you described, just being a little bit more cynical, a little bit, more negative about things and people that we used to enjoy, right? So I think that's all part of it. And then the third stage actually is the stage of reduced sense of personal accomplishment. And this is the stage where we start to lose sight of what it was about the work we're doing that actually we enjoyed, right? That actually drew us to it. And this is the stage where a lot of physicians start to think about, can I leave? Can I cut back? What else can I do? Because I'm not getting that same sense of satisfaction.
That's very helpful, Mamta. Now, I think the first step is awareness and recognizing the signs.
Right.
And then this has happened to me most years, I would say. I experienced burnout at some point. And now that I'm more familiar with it, I can start to put in a few preventative measures to make sure that either it doesn't happen or what I experience is less intense. But can you go over some of these preventative measures that we can put into place?
Yeah, and you've actually alluded to what I think is one of the most important one, which is just being aware of what the signs are and monitoring for yourself regularly. And so what sometimes happens for us in medicine is we wait too long, right? And we sort of, somehow convince ourselves and rationalize some of what we're feeling and experiencing, when in fact we should recognize, this burnout is a real thing, really is, an occupational process hazard actually, and it happens when the demands of our work exceed the resources, which is, happening more and more in healthcare. When I first started talking about this 30 years ago, we were talking about, the physician, perhaps 1 in 4, 1 in 3, experiencing this. Before the pandemic, we saw rates go up to like 1 in 2 physicians experiencing signs and symptoms of this. And I was chairing the OMA task force on burnout. We sent out a survey just as the pandemic was hitting us in February, March of 2020, and we saw rates of burnout skyrocket to like 70-75%, so like 3 and 4, and we're probably somewhere between 2 to 3 and 4 at this point, and that is because there are increasing demands, and I see sort of what I call the perfect storm, where we have fewer resources than we've ever had, whether it's healthcare resources or financial resources in the healthcare system, and we have greater need, right? And so when those come together, the situation is absolutely ripe for burnout. So I think the first is just recognizing that this is normal, and that none of us are immune to this. This can happen to any one of us. You can take any healthy, highly functioning person and push them and push them and push them into what for them is an unhealthy environment, and they're going to become unhealthy, right? So it really is something that we're all at risk of. So then how do we, knowing that, look out for it, right? Monitor ourselves on a regular basis. I call it the birthday rule. Like every year on my birthday, I stop and I take a little bit of time, and I have to say I borrowed that from the Ministry of Transport, right? Because they used to every year on our birthday remind us to put the stickers on our license plates. So I thought, everyone has a birthday. Let's stop and just put aside some time on our birthdays to just scan different parts of our life and look at our level of satisfaction with that. And then every month on that day, I do that same thing, just to a lesser degree, sit down with a cup of tea and kind of look at, again, where am I with this? And I want to mention, and I'm happy to share it with you or our listeners, but there is this mental health continuum that's been adapted from the Road to Mental Readiness from the Canadian Armed Forces. And I think the resident organizations physicians use it, but it's something what I like about it is that it really just talks about, how am I feeling today? And really just in a way that we are all used to. So green is go, I'm good. Red is stop, I'm not feeling so good. And then somewhere in the middle is like yellow and orange, where I need to be thinking, that maybe I'm starting to react a little bit more or have a sense of injury, and even just to wake up and think about, where am I in that spectrum? Is today a green day, or a yellow or orange, or am I red, right? And I will say that what I've noticed with colleagues is that there are many fewer of us feeling like we're in that green zone since the pandemic, right? That's just a reality. But just even having something simple like that, right? Like, what color do I feel today? And monitoring it on a regular basis, and then looking at, what are the things that I can do to invest in myself, so that I have the energy, right, to do the things I need to do.
I like that framework, Mamta, because it is semi-quantitative as a way to assess how we're feeling. And I also like your discussion of, oh, your birthday was coming up. Maybe it's a time to just step back
Right.
and take things down a notch. And this reminds me of a concept that I read in one of my recent books, Slow Productivity by Cal Newport, who's one of my favorite authors. And he talks about this concept of embedding a slower season into your calendar year. And so one thing I noticed with myself was April was a very busy month. I probably did 8 to 10 call shifts. That's usually what I would do in at least 3 months. And by the end of April, I felt totally burnt out. And I realized that one of the things that I can do ahead of time is swap some shifts around. I don't have to put all the pressure on myself in that month. Maybe just pull back a bit, trade some shifts, and make sure that what I'm doing at work is just weaving into the natural rhythm of my life a little bit more. So that's something that I'm keeping in mind going forward.
Right, I really
I,
like that.
yeah. Yeah, I do want to ask you also about finance a little bit, and because this is a financial literacy podcast, but perhaps in the time that you have spent coaching physicians, talking to physicians, have you had any observations on financial literacy or financial well-being? Does this have an impact in how physicians feel about their work and how burnt out they feel? I'd love for you to comment on this if you can.
Yeah. So I can tell you sort of anecdotally, we don't have a lot of research on this, although I will refer to one study I think that supports this. But basically, what we see is that our medical curriculum, of course, teaches us nothing, if or very little, if at all, about finances, financial literacy, and yet we're seeing great levels of desires by learners and physicians in practice to know more about finances and improve their financial literacy. And just overall, I think if you look at the world or society, worries about finances is one of the number one stressors across all age groups, and I think even more so in medicine. We don't learn any of these skills, as they say, and we graduate with an enormous amount of debt, many of us, which really adds to that sense of stress, the sense of anxiety, uncertainty, and then, of course, we get into practice and we don't really have the time to learn some of these skills or to actually practice what it is that we need. And so this, we're kind of on this hamster wheel, right? Just working hard, trying to somehow manage our expenses, pay our bills. And the other thing that I see, honestly, is there are two other factors when I think about physicians and literacy, financial literacy over the years. What I've seen in my practice, one is that we don't have a lot of self-awareness about what money means to us. And what I mean by that is that we've all had experiences as children that really color our relationship with money. And so, for example, if I grow up in a family where money was always an issue, and we didn't have a lot, and our parents talked about it and worried about it a lot, it doesn't matter how much money I'm going to be able to earn as a physician. I'm still always going to have that worry. And we've never stopped to think about it. It just becomes like a knee-jerk reaction, something that kind of is a thread throughout our whole life. And so I think that self-awareness and really understanding and helping us maybe create some more realistic expectations of how much money do we need, how much work does that take for us to do that, and so it is okay to perhaps slow down at times and give ourselves those breaks that we talked about, right? So that's one thing. And then the other concept I've seen too is almost this sense of entitlement. And by that I mean, like, we spend so much time studying, right? And, like 15 years to get to, the time that we can start to really earn as a physician. And we see our friends and colleagues from high school, doing a 4-year degree, starting to earn, over 10 years before we do. And the sense of, we've put this off, and not only have we put it off, but we've worked hard. Like, we are, really pushing ourselves through our training, and then we finish, right? And then there's a sense of, I'm owed somehow because I've made all these sacrifices. And I see physicians early on in their careers, sort of reacting in a way that probably isn't the most fiscally responsible because of this sense of entitlement, because of this. So, so often they're sort of either ends of the spectrum. Either we can't, spend money and ever feel reassured we have enough because of our backgrounds, or we overspend because we feel like we've made so many sacrifices. And I think these are just things that, we need to talk about a little bit more, help us really understand, as they say, what is a realistic expectation here. And I just wanted to mention that in 2020, as I was thinking about this, I heard actually of all the losses that we had during the pandemic. For some physicians, there was a financial loss and uncertainty certainly as well. And as colleagues were sharing some of that with me, I did come across a study, and they looked at actually creating a literacy curriculum for residents in OBGYN and looking at how that connected to their sense of well-being. And so they had this 5-part personal financial literacy curriculum over a couple of years. And what they saw was that certainly did lead to an increased sense of well-being, right? So this is a 2020 study by Cower, Blanchard, and Kim. And so, I think that it described what we intuitively know, that the more we have a sense of understanding, the more we have a sense of control, the more we can identify what's meaningful to us in terms of our life, and then commit to working and having the finances to achieve that, the healthier we feel.
Mamta, your perspectives are very helpful there. And speaking of a handbook, I do know of one that is in the works. I hope I'm not mentioning it too early, but one of my friends out east, Keithan Kulkarni, who had been working on a handbook with one of his medical students, Haley Gates, and I was kind of looking at this preliminary version, but it's meant to be a handbook to guide learners and early staff in their years to understand, like, what does money mean to you, understand your relationship with money, and to equip you with the knowledge to make the right decision. So hopefully that will be coming out at some point. Mamta, let's move on to resilience. This is a topic that you are very well known for. Maybe you can start by discussing your 5 C's framework about resilience, and then we can dig a bit deeper into it.
Okay, thank you. And I see resilience, when we think about resilience, we think about sort of bouncing back from difficult situations, which is really what, we're all faced with, probably on a day-to-day basis in medicine, and then the need to have that resilience to be able to deal with it. And I think true resilience is a little bit more than just bouncing back. And so if you think about, before, during, and after that difficult situation, before, do I have, say, some of the skills and strategies that I know I'm going to need when I get into a difficult situation? Then here I am now in the middle of it, in the middle of my day. Can I somehow leverage and harness, what I wanted to be able to do to get through this? And then after, right, have I learned from this? And can I grow and maybe bounce back a little bit further than where I started at the beginning? That, to me, would be true resilience. And, over the years, as I have had the privilege of working with physician colleagues in my practice, now, almost 40 years, I think that, I look at, what have I learned from them? And this actually started as a chart review, partly to get, believe it or not, Section 3 credits from the Royal College. I thought, well, what can I actually do proactively? But at the end of the day, I did look at the past sort of 1,000 physicians that came into my practice and thought about, what did they learn that helped them either improve and then stay well, and what are they continuing to do on a day-to-day basis that did that? And I also looked at physicians in the same situation. What we would see is some people would reach out to me, but there'd always be some who didn't. Right? And I think, well, what are they doing that's helping them manage in a very difficult situation when others are looking for help? So I started to identify some common themes, and that's actually how I came up with the 5 C's of resilience. And so the first one is control. Do I understand? Do I have a sense of control? And what I've realized over the years is probably the number one cause of stress is feeling like I don't have any control in this situation. I think back to the last thing that you were really stressed about. There would be a sense of I'm stuck, I'm backed into a corner, I'm trapped in some way, I don't know what to do, and that the loss of control. And if that feeling is the number one cause of stress, then the solution is to really challenge that perspective. And what I see for us as physicians is we're bright, we're logical. I look at me in a certain situation and I think, there's me and I may be like a small part, 1 or 2% of the situation. And then like say in my practice, and then there's, all the other psychiatrists, our patients, people in my department, people in my hospital, people in my community, people in healthcare in Ontario or in Canada. I'm just a tiny little cog in the wheel. And so I'm hoping, of course, logically, that the bulk of the issue gets addressed. And the fact is, we forget that we have no control over whatever is around us, right? That 98%. And so we need to acknowledge it. We need to work on it. I've talked earlier about advocacy, and there are skills to advocate for change, at an external level. But at the end of the day, we're focusing on this 98% that we actually have no full control over. Surprise. We feel like we don't have any control. And what we need to do is to come back to the 2% that we can control. It's not much, but how I'm thinking, how I'm reacting, what my expectations were, my strengths, my weaknesses, my ability to set limits, those kinds of things. And while that 2% is not much, it's the part that we have 100% control over, right?
Totally agree.
What is control? And I think that the more we can stop and think about, what can I control here and how can I focus on that, and then learn to work on the things I don't have full control over, I think that helps us in our resilience. The second C is the commitment. You and I have talked already a little bit. We've alluded about, the importance of understanding the meaning of the work that we do, the why. Basically, Simon Sinek says start with why, right? And we all remembered it. Like we go back to that interview we did for medical school, and where we were able to explain what it was about medicine that we really enjoyed. And then when we get, as we start to work harder, as we start to feel those symptoms of burning out, as we start to pull away from people, we lose that sense, right? I remember I said that last stage of burnout, there's no sort of sense of achievement or accomplishment. And so one of the big things that I see is, those of us who stay connected to our why. Right, to recognizing what is the commitment, how do I remind myself every day, like why I do this work, and we all have, good outcomes. We might have, comments, thank you notes from our patients, from families, from our colleagues. We need to make note of those. We need to remember those because there will be days where we forget the why, and we're going to have to remind ourselves. And through the pandemic, one thing I really saw was that people look to us, we look to each other, right, for that sense of hope through difficult times. But but you cannot give what you do not have, right? And so, and the staying connected to the why reminds us of, why we can continue to be hopeful as we do our day-to-day work. So I think that commitment is really important. One of the C's. Another C is connections. Right? Caring connections. You cannot do this by yourself. One thing that I learned, and I often joke that I use my child psychiatry knowledge and skills every day as I deal with colleagues. But there are some great concepts that help us understand things in a different way. And one thing that I remember from child psychiatry is this concept of a holding environment, which is, what we do. If I have when I have a baby, I hold my baby and I make it feel cared for, and I anticipate its needs, and I support it so that it can trust that I'm going to be there for them, right? And then this is what allows babies to crawl away from me, go around the corner, but know that I'm still going to be there when they come back. This is what helps them go off to first day of kindergarten or off to university in another city even, because they feel held, right? And the connections piece is, how do we identify this? How do we identify the people in our lives that help us feel held and nurture those relationships at work and in our home, as our personal life as well? And then how can we think about creating this holding environment for people that we care about? Like, so in the workplace, right? What do we do to help our colleagues feel like we're there for them, that we've got their back? And again, those of us who do this more consciously, more proactively, end up, of course, having people around them that help them remain resilient. The fourth C is calming. There are lots of times in our lives where we get upset, and understandably so. And as I said earlier, none of us through the pandemic are really at our best. And that's okay, because that's just human. But what we want to do is to think about, how can I understand what are my early warning signs, and how can I start to help myself calm down when I am upset or when I am angry, instead of just, show my emotion in a way that's probably not in my benefit or benefiting people around me. And I used to spend a lot of time talking to people about things like visualization, about mindfulness, about relaxation exercises, breathing exercises, spirituality. There's a whole lot of things that we can do for that. And people would say to me, "That's great, Mamta, but I'm not that calm yet," right? And so what I offer is what I call my ABCs of calmness. So the A is really just, if you're upset, allow it. Allow your emotion. Now, you want to do this in, a safe, private space, perhaps with one person that you may be able to share some thoughts or feelings with, and you want to confine it, right? You want to allow yourself those feelings, experience them, process them, and let them go. And studies show that about 20 minutes is all you need. If it goes on for longer, it's actually not going to help you more. And so, give yourself the opportunity to just, name that feeling and allow it and feel it. And people will say, "That's great, but I'm still kind of revved up." So the B is burn it off, right? So do something physical. And again, I had a mentor in psychiatry who would say, emotions need motion. So how do you imagine sort of moving your body in some way and having the emotions flow through and out? And that could be, it could be go for a run. It could be put on some music and dance in your kitchen, right? It doesn't have to be a big workout, but it has to be some sort of moving your body. And then the C, the calming techniques that I talked about earlier, are much more likely to work. And so we need to have those tools, again, to allow us to stay resilient. And then the final C is caring for ourselves. And this is something that is not we do when we're upset, that we do when we need to, but we do proactively on a daily basis. And some of these are things that are that we all understand, and we would tell other people. We would tell our best friend to make sure they, sleep enough and eat properly and exercise every day. But we need to think about, why don't we do that on a regular basis if we don't, or what helps us? And one thing that I think is really helpful, and I think you alluded to it when you talked about what sort of monitoring your workflow a little bit more, was really this concept of an energy tank, right? That we all, unlike our cars, we don't come with gas gauges. We don't know when we're kind of running on empty. I wish we did, but we don't. But if we think about sort of that gas tank and think about, our time is energy. And everything that we do with our time takes energy. But some things that we do with our time, that take energy, actually create more energy for us, right? And how do we identify those? And there are some things that take time, that take energy, that actually just leave us drained. And so I think it's really important for us not, to be able to, as part of our self-care, identify, what are the things that are energy draining for us, and looking at sort of letting some of those go. And I have to tell you, and I was really, I felt really guilty when I first sort of thought about this. I thought, so this is great. I'm going to take the stuff I hate doing and kind of slough it off on somebody else, right? I'm not going to do that. And then I started to realize that, we're not all the same. And the things that are energy draining for me are actually energy creating for somebody else. And if I actually let some of those go, maybe somebody who is, energized by that can pick those up. And so, helping me feel a little bit less guilty. But I will also say that that's just the first part. The second step is, of all the things that are energy creating for us, right, and particularly in the workplace, how do we choose to only do some of them at this point in time? You can do everything you want, but just not all at the same time. And so how do we make some of these choices? And that's the hardest part, I think, for us, right, is choosing to not do something that we want to do, that we're good at, that people want us to do, right? And so, but I think that is part of that self-care. And what I see is that colleagues, and the important thing is, it's not just one of those. You need to be thinking about all five, doing something from all five of those areas to stay resilient.
But that was really good. As you were talking, I was jotting down notes, just reminding myself of that framework. I'm really glad that we finished the podcast on that. And I think there'll be a lot for people to take away. But as we wrap up, Mamta, I do want to give you a chance. If people want to learn more about what you're doing, all your work, where can they learn?
Yeah, well, I think listening to this podcast is a great start. I'm often speaking at meetings, but this is an area that is just so important to me, so meaningful, that I'm always happy to have somebody reach out and talk to me about it. I do have a website, peakmd.ca. A lot of my consulting and speaking work I do under my company PeakMD. So please go to the website, follow me on LinkedIn, on Instagram. I think in past years I've written a couple of books that people have found helpful as well. The Iron Dock and the Tarzan Rule. And so encouraging people to do that. And keep in mind that, some of this work I did earlier on, that I'm really excited to say has led to a greater interest in the whole area of physician well-being and a lot more attention paid to this. There are so many other amazing colleagues working in this space now, and I just really invite people to reach out and learn from them and learn from each other. Like, keep this conversation going.
Amazing. And Mamta, are there any closing thoughts you want to leave people with? Because if so, I want to give you that chance.
Yeah, well, I guess probably the one thing, this is that I hear over and over in my practice or with colleagues, is that this is not rocket science, what we need to do to take care of ourselves, whether it's in the area of financial well-being or all the other aspects of our physical and emotional and spiritual well-being as well. This is not rocket science. And as bright physicians, we do know what to do. And it's what I call the brain-heart gap, that there's a gap between what we know we need to do in our brains and what we give ourselves permission to do in our hearts. And the number one reason for that is guilt. Right? We have such a high sense of responsibility, and what I've learned from colleagues over the years is that we feel so guilty when we feel like we're not meeting that responsibility every single minute of our day. So I guess my closing thoughts would be to share this rule with people, which is that if there's something that you're thinking of doing that is going to help you feel better, and it makes you feel guilty, do it. That's the very thing you should do. Now, you can't quote me in a court, court of law, but realistically, if you were thinking of doing something, if it were right, illegal, unethical, irresponsible, immoral, whatever, it wouldn't even have trickled up to the surface as an actual thought, right? So if you're thinking of doing it, you think that it's going to help you feel better, it's the very thing you should do.
That's great. And I think one of the reasons we need to hear things like this from somebody like yourself is the truth is we're not very good at giving advice to ourselves. We're very good at giving advice to other people, but then when we want to talk ourselves through it, like you talk about that connection between your brain and your heart, we're just not good at talking ourselves through it. So Mamta, I want to thank you for making the time for us today. I thought that was amazing material, and I think everyone's going to get a lot of value. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to be here today.